Yes? Okay. Well, welcome. And you have 2 minutes for your comments, Uriel. Welcome to the commission meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Uriel Mejia. I live in Culver, Oregon, and every day I take Highway 97 to commute to and from school and work, all the way to Bend. The 97 is a lifeline for freight, travel, and commerce in Central Oregon. It's a major highway as a whole in Oregon. And over time, though, it's become one of the deadliest highways in Oregon. And just yesterday, in fact, there was a fatal accident along it. The overwhelming majority of the fatal accidents on Highway 97 are due to head-on collisions between cars that are crossing into oncoming lanes at super high rates of speed. Much of the Highway 97 is underdeveloped between Madras and Bend, and it's just the community here in Central Oregon, it's desperately needed that more improvements for safety measures are built along the highway for us. Even just today, there's several accidents along it as well. This makes it so that any driver that just dozes off the wheel for even just a second can just cross into an oncoming lane and cause a potentially fatal accident. So I'm asking that you guys at least look into developing more safety improvements along the highway, as it's desperately needed here in Central Oregon.
Great. Thank you for your comments. As you probably know, one of our commissioners lives in Bend, and so we have direct presence at the commission level. And then, of course, one of our regional offices is headquartered in Bend as well. So 97 is a major priority for safety, congestion, and also response to emergency, particularly natural emergencies like earthquakes, et cetera. It's a key piece of our equation. So I appreciate your comments. Commissioner Smith, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And you will probably see some changes coming because the North Corridor project is going to be underway, which will have some pretty major safety improvements to a portion of the corridor. But there's still some need for median work. And I agree with you that there's some safety issues there. And I think the region is doing, what it can to address some of those. And I think that work is ongoing. So I appreciate your comments.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate your participating. That's important. Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to our, thank you. We're going to move on to John Halen. No? Okay, I'm getting a strong indication that John is not going to be with us today. So we'll move to Mickey Barnes, founder of Oregon Aviation Watch. Mickey?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
You are.
Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I want to comment on some current concerns I have about Connect Oregon funding to Oregon airports. Nationwide, airports are responsible for 70% of all airborne lead emissions. In Oregon, the percentage of lead released by mobile aircraft is even higher, 87%, compared to all other sectors. In Washington County, the most lead polluted county in the entire state, mobile aircraft are responsible for 93% of all lead pollution. The largest source of these lead emissions is the Hillsborough Airport, a facility that has received a $4 million Connect Oregon 3 grant for a third runway, largely to accommodate student pilots and private pilots, a population that comprises less than 0.25% of the population. Users of HIO daily bludgeon local residents with a toxic combination of lead emissions, noise, PM 2.5, and a host of other pollutants released by fossil fuel burning engines. In addition, these aircraft contribute to global warming. While many people in Oregon are taking steps to reduce their carbon footprint, the same cannot be said for the aviation industry. In fact, many of us are trying to walk more, bicycle, carpool, use public transit, reduce driving time, limit airplane travel. But in the meantime, the state of Oregon, via Connect Oregon, is funding one of the most polluting modes of transportation on the planet. Despite these significant negative impacts, I have yet to see a single Connect Oregon grant addressing the widespread damage perpetrated by the users of these airports. Hillsborough Airport is the 8th largest lead polluting airport in the country and one of the most lead polluted airports on the entire planet. 20 years ago, my husband and I moved from Cedar Mill to a woodland location more than 12 miles from HIO in an effort to get out from underneath the PDX flight path. We even consulted with the Port Noise office before purchasing our home. Yet, shortly after we moved, we found ourselves subjected to oftentimes relentless general aviation noise. The primary offender, Hillsborough Aviation, now Hillsborough Aero Academy, a company that boasts of training pilots from over 75 countries. In fact, Hillsborough Aero Academy is one of the few that has a contract with the Civil Aviation Authority of China, which then leads to my next question. How does subsidizing flight training on behalf of the People's Republic of China enhance the national security interests of US residents? We're hearing more and more stories about cybersecurity threats at airports. We're hearing that Europe has taken measures to stop China from recruiting military pilots to train their military. I'm wondering what could be done for Connect Oregon to become more sensitive to the livability, environmental, safety, and security concerns of people who live in Washington County and other communities around the state.
Thank you, Mickey, very much for your comments. We will have some conversations to learn more about the concerns you've raised. I'll appoint myself to be on point on that. So I appreciate your being here and talking to us about this area of concern.
And I'll tell you, I'm very willing to meet with any or all of you. I've done significant research. I have a website, Oregon Aviation Watch.org. We do support the endangerment finding, and I would ask the Oregon Transportation Commission to support the endangerment finding on leaded fuel and to work toward banning the use of all leaded fuel at Oregon airports. I would gladly work with you on this, and I thank you so very much for hearing my testimony or my comments.
Thank you again, and thank you for the offer of talking with us further. Okay, with that, I think we're at the conclusion of our public comment period, unless looking at Lisa and Sabrina is that correct? Okay, great. Thank you to all of the people who have commented this morning and at all of our meetings. So we are now going to move to the director's report and the consent agenda. As I said, Director Strickler is out today, but we have Assistant Director Brown. And before I turn it over to him, I just wanted to say I was on the final interview team, I think it was 4 years ago, when we created the position of Chief of Staff to the Oregon Transportation Commission. That has kind of morphed a little bit over the years. And the final interview team was then Chair Tammy Bainey, Chair of the Commission, myself, and Travis Brower. And we had a finalist, one of two, named Cooper Brown, who had a really interesting background, but maybe a little short on transportation, but long in a lot of other areas. And we thought, this guy has got tremendous upside. A little bit more of a new kind of hire outside the agency and also kind of outside of the transportation community. But clearly very talented. And he has since moved from there to being an assistant director, charge of operations, maybe the broadest scope of responsibilities of any of the assistant directors, certainly one of the largest and broadest set of responsibilities. And Cooper has just moved from the first position to the position he's in now, really seamlessly and extremely professional and capable manner. I think the commission has always had confidence in him in both the roles he's played at the commission, at the agency. And so we're sorry to see you go whenever the official date is, and really want to thank you for everything that you've done. And I guess before we're going to let you speak, we're going to talk about you a little more. So anyone who wants to add, Julie, I know you have been involved in a lot of the Cooper's tenure, so maybe to you next.
Well, I also was on the interview team. And I remember when Mr. Brown came before us and I said, here's some leadership that ODOT needs to grab. And we could tell right off the bat that you were probably, for the position we were hiring you in, you were so overqualified. But we knew that there was a place for you in the agency. So thank you for your time that you've put in. I think you know personally what I think about you. And even though I whipped up on you last meeting a little bit there, Cooper, no, I really respect you. I actually offered him a job. And I really do.
Let's just get it all out of
Time, but no, I just really appreciate you. And I think that you've done wonders for us. And I know that talking to the regional employees, how much it's meant to them that you've been out in the field, meeting with them and giving them goals to meet. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll echo all those comments and thank you. Is now the time where I make the motion that we're not allowing him to leave?
I'll second that.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
Well, thank you.
We're exempting you from the 13th Amendment.
Anyway, appreciate all your service and I know you're going to do fabulous in your next endeavor and keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marson, anything?
I'll just add that when I found out you were leaving, I said, that's it, I'm done.
Cause and effect.
You have been a tremendous help to me as a new member of the commission, and I've appreciated your work ethic, your expertise, and your tact. And so I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, commissioners.
Yes,
Chairman
please.
Brockman.
Please proceed.
Commissioners, for the record, Cooper Brown, if you haven't gathered that yet, Cooper Brown, Assistant Director for Operations. I really do appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much. It's been a genuine pleasure working with all of you and supporting your leadership. Thank you for what you've done for this agency, for our state. I guess I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't flag that it has been just a genuine honor to work for this agency and work with the folks of this agency, the men and women out there that are doing what they do every day for our state and for our citizens. It is remarkable. I'm constantly amazed by that and inspired by it. And it's I know it will continue, and that's just been a real pleasure. So appreciate having the opportunity to fill this role for a few years. With that, I might transition though, as mentioned, sitting in, I suppose, for Director Strickler, who's out sick. I know we all wish him a speedy recovery. Have a couple items for the director's report that we'd like to share with you today. And then we can turn to the consent calendar if you will. The two items for the director's report, one is a recognition of one of those fabulous employees that we have so many of within our agency. Mary Brazel, our Transportation Electrification Program Manager, was recently awarded the 2022 Drive Electric Awards. And she was the recipient of that. And these awards have been around for a few years and really, as I understand them, go out to those leaders across the country who are at the cutting edge of helping us electrify our system. Mary has been a huge leader and provided an amazing amount of impact for this body of work for our agency. She has been in charge of advancing our zero emissions vehicle charging infrastructure deployment and the adoption across all of our transportation modes. Prior to coming to ODOT, Mary was an independent consultant and played a central role in launching and accelerating numerous EV initiatives in that capacity. So a wealth of expertise. Congratulations to Mary and the entire team that she supports. They're doing really, really fantastic work. The other item that we'd like to bring to your attention is on Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. As you all know, this is a huge project for us and for the state and for our partners to the north, and it requires a good deal of funding. So on the funding front, I wanted to let you know that in October, FHWA did award $1 million planning grant to us to help facilitate that work. We're also going in with our partners to the north with WashDOT and submitting a $750 million grant request for construction grants. That has not been announced, and I'm not entirely sure when that will be, but we have submitted for that award as well. And then, of course, we continue to have numerous conversations in preparation for the next legislative session with our legislative leadership and continue that outreach and engagement in the hopes that they'll consider a $1 billion contribution for that work, because it has a price tag to it. So those are the items from the director's seat for the commission's awareness.
Thank you. We knew you'd be director at some point. So here it is. It's right in front of us.
This is about as much as I will probably would like to do. So, yeah, appreciate it.
Well, this is your Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame.
There you go. I'll take it.
Okay, questions for the assistant director? Okay, I think we can move on to the consent agenda.
You bet. So for the consent calendar, we have 10 consent items for your consideration today. Just running through them real quickly. They are the typical approval of meeting minutes and our game plan for upcoming meetings. They also include a smattering of administrative rules that you're familiar with that come to you often for updates. We have a legislative report on an audit report that is due to our legislative leadership. There is a stiff formula-based adjustment in there as well, which is a result of the increased revenue that we've seen through that program. And then you have five STIP amendments on there. And I guess my short characterization of those would be primarily those are results of the inflation that we're seeing across our construction work across the state. And so in summary, you have 10 items in block for your consideration.
Do I have a motion?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Commissioner Smith moves approval of the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Burke seconds. Discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Cooper. Okay, we're going to move on to Brendan and Della. And an informational briefing on the urban mobility strategy. Welcome. Congratulations on finding the room.
We found it. Good morning. Good to be here. Well, good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam
Morning.
Vice Chair, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Brendan Finn, Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office, joined by Deputy Director Della Mosier. Here to give you our Urban Mobility Office update status on the implementation of the Urban Mobility Strategy. So I'll ask for the next slide, please. As we like to begin with our map, just giving us, again, a bit of context on some of the work that we're doing. And as you know, much of that came from House Bill 2017, expanded and ratified through House Bill 3055 and many other components, ones we'll get into here this morning, that augment that comprehensive approach to addressing congestion and mobility issues in the Portland metropolitan region. I'll have you look at the map and see the project of Oregon 217. This was one of the signature projects from House Bill 2017. You'll be hearing a little bit more about how that's going from Region 1 Manager Brian Winsheimer and his top engineer, Tova Peltz. So we look forward to that coming up. But I do want to take your attention to the portion in the northwest section of the map and the West Side Multimodal Study. This is an area we're sitting in right now, so it was timely that we give you an update on what's happening there. Since 2017, the Sunset Corridor has seen a massive increase in congestion, mobility issues throughout that region, so much so that community leaders, business leaders came to the governor's office and ODOT and said, we need to convene a study to look for solutions. So with that, I'm here to tell you where we are in that process. Next slide. Well, here's the study area. You can see it. It's a large study area through that Sunset Corridor. We're kind of sitting in the western portion of it. One of the largest employment areas and economic development engine, the Silicon Forest, resides within this area. We know some of the needs that exist now. We're gathering a lot of data on what we see to be some of the issues as we move towards solutions, but there's a lack of access to transit. The limited infrastructure that we do have in this corridor is leading to diversion onto local streets, creating many safety issues there. As I mentioned, many of these businesses that you probably drove by on your way here rely on this system for freight movement. For some of these bigger companies, it's absolutely critical that they can move their goods in and out of this region timely. So we know the needs. Next slide. So our team, and I do want to say that this study is being co-convened with our partners, with our metropolitan planning organization at Metro. We have some of the best minds there on modeling and data, so we can really inform the process that we're moving forward on to make sure we come up with the right solutions. I picked a couple of data points. We won't get too stuck on these because there's hundreds of these that we're compiling for this study. But just to kind of illustrate a little bit of the issues we're seeing here, and I'll start with freight. As you'll see on the graphic to the left, obviously the I-5 corridor is one of the main lines for freight for the West Coast. So you'll see that line very dark there. But if you see on US 26, heading out west to where we are right now, this is the highest level of truck traffic on any of our non-interstate highways in the state of Oregon. And you'll see that's about 6,700 trips a day. And then looking over to the graphic to the right, this kind of shows what we're seeing as some of the issues here. While parts of those trips through freight are only 5% as they head towards the Vista Ridge Tunnel, we're noticing a massive amount of diversion that's happening on Cornelius Pass, avoiding the congestion as they're heading east towards the Vista Ridge Tunnel. And that diversion is now we're calculating at about 127,000 trips per day. So it's significant and continuing. Next slide.
So can I just?
Yes,
for a
Mr.
second,
Chair.
can you go back to that slide?
Absolutely.
So they're connecting onto 30. Is that what's happening?
That's correct. As you see that dark red line there on 30. Obviously, they're trying to get over to many of these trips to I-5, many of them trying to get to PDX, some of them traveling north and south through the I-5 corridor.
So they're going through North Portland to get to 5.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yep. That's why we need to find solutions in this corridor.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons.
Big problem.
Yep. Indeed. Okay, well, we'll
Thank
talk a
you.
little bit.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please do. Please do. So let's look a little bit at commute patterns. What's happening here? We have a large workforce in this, and these are some, again, we cherry picked some numbers. There's a lot of other data points that we're compiling. But these kind of stand out to me. I'm sure they will to you as well. 27,000 of the people that live in this study area around those boundaries actually work in the study area. Now let's compare that with the residents that live in this study area who travel out of this study area to work. That's 64,000. And to me, the largest figure is workers who travel into the study area that do not reside in the study area. We have 97,000. So you're starting to get a feel of the issues there. Granted, there's work to do on land use and other pieces, but the transportation system plays an absolute critical role. And while we have this great data and analysis and modeling and analytics, that only gets us so far. What we really need to do is have the most robust engagement process with the stakeholders that exist in this study area and around this part of the region. So that's how I segue into the next slide. So to do that, we have a great governance structure. We've kind of started in earnest some of our outreach efforts that we have. I can co-convene the steering committee with Metro President Lynn Peterson. We have great representation there from community-based organizations. You'll see leadership there on the elected level from municipalities in this region, as well as business, our transit providers, as well as others. Just yesterday, we did convene a business roundtable, some of the largest employers and some of the smallest here in this region to really deep dive on some of their needs there. We know through our data what we're seeing right now. They know what may happen in the future and what they're seeing now that we might be missing. So that was a great conversation. We look forward to have more. Obviously, we know as part of the strategic plan, our commitment to equity. We are having some conversations with community-based organizations who are leading focus groups so we can understand that issue a little bit more as we bring forward solutions to that. And we're going to continue to have that robust process of reaching out to folks in the community. The steering committee will meet 3 more times. And we wanted to bring this to your attention now, because as this process continues to mature, we'll start to see lists of projects and solutions that will be coming at the end of next summer. So putting it on the commission's radar, wanting to know how we're reaching out. Obviously very fitting that we sit in this study area today so we can all observe it as we travel out of this area, some of the issues there. So with that, before I turn it over to Della to talk about our public transportation strategy, I want to pause to see if there are any questions, comments, or concerns from the commission.
Questions? Commissioner Smith.
Just a comment. Getting here yesterday and this morning, I certainly see the challenges. Yeah.
Indeed.
Other questions, comments? Vice
Thank-
Chair.
I think one of my comments yesterday, we met with all the ACT chairs and the conversation was around funding. And one of the things that really became apparent to me is that getting this information out to the other regional areas is critical so that they can understand the challenges in Region 1. Because one of the things that was said in the spirit of trying to figure out how we're going to fund all these transportation projects across the state of Oregon was that we need to start doing it as a team, a whole Oregon instead of our individual areas. And that if they understood some of the solutions or some of the problems, they might be able to understand why their project isn't a priority. So this is critical, I think, in getting that communication out.
Great point, Madam Vice Chair. We'll do that.
I just have one. I don't know if it's a comment or may end up being a question, but so I've had a number of conversations with larger businesses in Washington County about getting goods to market. One particularly vivid conversation was with a company that produces a lot of product here in Washington County that it then ships around the world. And its transportation pattern is, because it's an international market they're serving, because it relies on getting to international flights, they truck a lot of this from here to SeaTac and SFO rather than PDX, because PDX doesn't have nearly as many international cargo flights. Well, I want to get to the specific thing that was said that was just stunning to me. They said they used to have a deadline for getting product out the door, if you will, in trucks and trucks moving onto 26. They had, I think it was either 4 or 4:30 was their deadline, and that is gradually moved up to 3:30, 3, 2:30. So you can imagine what that does to their day, and I'm sure the same thing's happening in the morning commute. So we're shrinking the window as congestion worsens, and particularly the 26 corridor. But it also leads out into the challenges we have on I-5 in particular. So it's really the whole system. And is the system adequate to serve that? We don't get a lot of public comment here on that, so it doesn't come up. But I view this as one of the most serious economic challenges facing the state, because out here, this is a center, maybe the center of the Oregon economy. Not just the Washington County economy or the West Side's economy, the whole state is dependent on this working. So what you've shown us this morning, is consistent with that, and the problem is not getting better. So I think your point about getting the right people in the room to problem solve and to coalesce, I think this is one of the most important things going on in transportation in the state. And so I hope we are connecting not just with our public sector partners, but with the private sector.
Yeah, and we heard that loud and clear yesterday from Intels, AMRs, a lot of big business leaders that were a part of that, articulating exactly what you said, Mr. Chair. And we want to articulate back to them our commitment that this process is about finding solutions. It's not a study for the sake of a study. So.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Real quick.
Ella? Oh, yeah, Vice Chair.
The online survey that's going to take place in the winter and spring, is this how are we rolling that out so that people that live in this community or work in this community can respond?
Madam Vice Chair, I don't have all the detail on exactly how we're doing that, but I will get that and we'll forward that over to you so we know that process. And taking into account the comments that you made, that we want to have a pretty far reach beyond maybe the study area. Okay, thank you. So with that, Mr. Chair, we will move on. And as you know, one of the other big pieces of the urban mobility strategy is the direction that we've gotten to implement a regional mobility pricing project along the I-205 and I-5 corridors. And with that, the implementation of that will change the way we look at the entire system, and in particular, how we look at the public transportation system. So the strategy around that has been a partnership. And with that, I want to turn it over to Deputy Director Della Mosier.
Thanks, Brendan. Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Vice Chair Brown, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Della Mosier, and I'm the Deputy Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. This morning, I will be building upon some of the more multimodal components of the urban mobility strategy, as I have the pleasure of talking about our public transportation strategy. As you can see on the slide, the purpose of the strategy is to identify near-term and longer-term projects and services that are complementary components of a congestion pricing system or tolling on I-5 and I-205. The goal of the public transportation travel policy is to ensure that we have options along tolled corridors to be able to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and to make meaningful contribution to congestion relief and support our climate goals. We also want to do this work with a particular focus on including communities that have historically or currently been excluded and underserved. Although ODOT is creating the table for this conversation, we are looking to our regional and local transit leaders to provide their expertise in how to guide the strategy as well as develop a work plan. The next steps include finalizing the work plan and schedule, identifying projects, developing screening criteria, screening those projects against the screening criteria, identifying funds for those projects that are deemed to move forward, and then working to program those projects into our local transportation improvement plans. So next slide, please. I also have the pleasure today of providing an update on the Innovative Mobility Program. At the direction of this commission, this program was established in May of 2022, and it has the aim of increasing equitable and climate-friendly transportation option access, and doing that in a way that empowers community-based organizations to not just provide input, but to serve as delivery partners through this program. The work includes around $20 million in allocated funds and is being led by Public Transportation Division Administrator Criswell and team in coordination with the Urban Mobility Office. The reason for our one of the reasons for our very close relationship on this program is that although this is a statewide program, it is envisioned to play a critical role in managing transportation demand changes as the I-205 tolling program comes online. So a little bit about the actual program. There are programs as small as $5,000 included in the micro grant program. And to date, we have received over 30 applications for that program. And then there's a competitive larger grant program and contracting services that are looking to come online next year. The reason that the larger grant program won't be coming online until about a year from now or the summer or fall of 2023 is because we are continuing engagement with those 70 organizations, community-based organizations, who are helping us determine how best to structure the program to make it easily accessible by those community-based organizations, as well as to ensure that we're raising awareness so that when that program hits the streets in the year, it can be as successful as possible. As related to the implementation of that program, we're also identifying ways that we can provide support to those community-based organizations so that they are able to successfully administer those state and federal funds. So the next steps will include continued design of those large, more competitive grants. We'll also be looking for opportunities to initiate some contract services for van pools. And additional information can be found by clicking on the link provided in the letter for this agenda item that is located online. So with that, I'll turn it to Brendan to close us out.
Yeah, you can just go to the next slide and we'll finish up here. Rather brief today, just some informational pieces. So Mr. Chair, want to make sure there's any comments or anything else you want to bring up around the work that we're doing. We want to make sure we give the commission that opportunity. And we want to thank Commissioner Burke, obviously, for your service as well. Thank you.
Questions, comments? I guess I'll just say this office is doing really groundbreaking work, and we're thrilled that you guys are leading it. So with a great team of people. So in coordination and partnership with Region 1 in particular, but to the comments that have already been made, really trying to get the entire state to understand how the pieces fit. And we need to understand how pieces elsewhere fit. So it's not a one-way street. There's a lot for us to do to tie all this together into a single, well understood, broadly understood vision for the future. that is really focused on all of our regions. But there is this interplay that we need to make sure people get. And so I know you're working hard on that piece. It's exciting and it's a little intimidating level of change we're looking at here, but confident your leadership will get us there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Chair.
Okay, we're going to move on to speaking of Region 1. We have the regional director here, manager of Region 1, Ryan Winsheimer, and Region 1 project delivery manager, Tova Peltz. Welcome to you both.
Thank
This is a
you.
conversation about another big project in Washington County.
Thank you, Chair Van Brocklin, Vice Chair Brown, and members of the commission. Yes, it's an extension of our urban mobility strategy and one of the delivery components here. We're really excited to tell you about this, and I had the opportunity to speak with Assistant Director Brown yesterday and let him know just the excitement of all of Region 1 and our team about being able to tell you about some of the work we're doing and the projects. And I hope we get an opportunity to continue to do this in the future. We got a lot to say, so I was very excited to see a few extra minutes. And
we will have you back.
Great. We'll go ahead and get started. So yes, I wanted to also mention I'm joined this morning by Tova Peltz, who's our Region 1 project delivery manager. And we're going to give you an overview of the Auxiliary Lands project. This is one of the first urban mobility strategy projects to get under construction, and next to the Abernathy Bridge, it's also one of the biggest. So now that we're about a year into construction, it's a good time to share some of our progress and make you aware of how we're keeping the public engaged. We'll start with a brief overview of the project, what we're building and why. We'll discuss the significant community outreach effort for this project, something we put a lot of effort in on every project. But given the multi-year nature of this one and the types of impacts, we're taking it to the next level. And specifically, I'd like to share with you how we're reaching people, what we're hearing, and what we're going to do with that feedback that we've received. We'll then get to show you what's happening over the past 11 months and what's happening on tap for the next 3 years. Let's see, are we?
Next slide.
Yeah, there we go. The timeline displayed here starts in 2017 when we received funding from House Bill 2017. But the project is actually the result of years and years of planning. Since as far back as 2004, there have been multiple community conversations about how to reduce crashes, relieve congestion, relieve the bottleneck, how to connect the north-south bike path and in the corridor. And more recently, this project was identified as part of ODOT's urban mobility strategy. And we will help deliver on that department's commitment for congestion relief. So as you can see, we're approaching the 1-year milestone with 3 more years of work ahead.
Ryan, can I just interrupt
Yeah,
to
sure.
just a termini question? So are we talking about 217 from where it connects to 26 to where it connects to I-5 or some subset of that?
Well, there's going to be a map and I'm going to get to show you. I'm going to get to show you in a second. I don't want to spoil.
You have a secret map that's coming up? Is it
Spoil the surprise.
colorful?
But the auxiliary lanes are really between Beaverton Hillsdale Highway South and southbound direction, and then from 217 north to Shoals Ferry.
Okay, great.
But you'll get a chance to see that.
I look forward to it.
Okay. Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot.
So funding, as we know, this project's been a regional priority for some time. Early planning and design funding was actually prioritized through the Act and through JPACT to develop the project design enough to be ready when legislative funding showed up, and that's the largest component of the project. Next slide. The secret map that we were talking about earlier. Yes. So what's the project doing? This slide provides a good overview of the major project elements, including the new southbound auxiliary lane from Beaverton Hillsdale Highway to 99W and extending the northbound auxiliary lane from Interstate 5 up to Shoals Ferry Road. We're also building a new frontage road between Allen Boulevard and Denny Road, which will remove one of the most challenging merging sections on the highway, which both improves safety and improves operation. Beyond the highway itself, in partnership with the city of Beaverton, the city of Tigard, and Washington County, we're also investing in targeted improvements in the local bicycle and pedestrian networks to ensure there's a complete north-south path through the entire corridor for bikes and peds. For example, we're widening the Hall Boulevard overpass in Beaverton 19 feet to allow space for sidewalks and bike lanes in each direction. And we're replacing the other Hall Boulevard overcrossing, which is in Tigard, which will be closed to vehicles for a while to speed up demolition and construction of the new structure. But we're going to maintain access for bikes and peds for the duration of the project. Some cool new things like building our sound walls with special sound absorbing materials that we're piloting on this project. And we're also implementing a new climate friendlier diesel emission standard. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that as we move on as well. Next slide. Today, 217 is congested 6 hours a day in the northbound direction and nearly 10 hours a day in the southbound direction. The 120,000 users each day expect congestion. They know it will take nearly 3 times as long to get through the corridor when it's congested than it does as free flow. And that's on a normal day. Some of you experienced this morning, I think, for talking about that. But if there's a crash, travel times are going to be much, much worse. Next slide. So why does 217 operate so poorly? Although this map isn't perfectly to scale, you can see some of the large number of interchanges in a very, very short area. These interchanges are too close together and don't provide enough space for drivers to merge on and off safely or efficiently. So the yellow auxiliary lane and the red frontage road shown on this map help in 2 ways. So next slide. Studies are showing that auxiliary lanes give drivers more space to accelerate and decelerate and more space to merge. This additional space results in a 20 to 30% reduction in those crashes I just mentioned earlier, and it means a safer and more efficient highway. Next slide. Another tool in our toolbox to reduce merging conflicts and address bottlenecks is to build a frontage road connecting 2 interchanges so people can travel between Allen Boulevard and Denny Road without having to get onto the highway. That's especially important here because the on and off ramps are spaced so closely together and on a curve, making it particularly difficult and challenging to merge, which is why this is one of the most congested locations on 217. This is a big component of the project. And in fact, a lot of our contractor resources are currently going towards building that frontage road right now. Next slide. These improvements mean fewer crashes, fewer near misses, fewer traffic bottlenecks, which will improve safety and result in less wasted time sitting in traffic. And as this slide says, 73,000 hours of travel time savings each year, which is huge. Next slide. Our goal is to improve travel for everyone in 217 corridor, including bikes and peds. There are some remaining gaps in the parallel network, and this project will help eliminate those gaps. Thank you to our partners again in Beaverton, Tigard, and Washington County for working with us to make these improvements happen. And I'll just stop for just a second and say, we're actually using some of the funding that ODOT has. We're actually sharing that funding with our partners so that they can go deliver some of these elements. They can do it sometimes cheaper and more efficiently, particularly if they have a project going on nearby. And so we're looking at taking advantage of those partnerships. And that's not a normal thing that we always think about. We're always trying to get those projects delivered ourselves. But when you have good partners, people who you can trust to sort of deliver on what they say they're going to do and willing to work with you on adding scope and changing their projects to help accommodate some of these things, it makes the project more efficient. It saves us money, and you end up with a better product. So I just wanted to take a second and share that. Let's see, I mentioned earlier with big projects comes, I think it's the next slide. With big projects comes lots of community engagement. Our mailers are going out to over 37,000 folks, and we have nearly 4,000 email update subscribers. But engagement means a lot more than ODOT project information pages. It means true engagement and partnership. And in this case, the community has really helped us shape the project for users and their community. For example, on past projects, we found not everyone wants a sound wall in their neighborhood, even when it's warranted. So we went to the neighborhoods and asked if they wanted them. It was interesting conversations with neighbors, and they actually, in this case, voted overwhelmingly in favor of the 5 sound walls on this project. And so we're going to be building them. We heard from neighbors concerned about construction noise, and in response, we made a commitment to construct the sound walls first so that they can get the maximum benefit during the noisy construction. In partnership with elected leaders in Tigard, the decision was made to move forward with a bridge replacement alternative that included a 9-month closure of the Hall Boulevard overcrossing. And during that process, we heard from people walking and biking and taking transit that the detour that they would have to use to access those modes would be difficult, challenging, and impactful. So in response, we agreed to modify our plans to maintain access for bikes and peds on the bridge during our work. So it's open for them the entire time. And one last example, as you know, Washington Square is a major shopping destination immediately adjacent to 217. And during the holiday seasons, and I say seasons, remembering that this is a 4-year project, we're going to be continuing to work with the mall and the community, and we've agreed not to close any local streets during the holiday shopping season. Next slide. Yeah, for you.
And how long is the holiday shopping season these days?
I still have Thanksgiving decorations up, and I will keep them up until the end of Thanksgiving. It's not Christmas yet. So during construction, we don't want people to be surprised by closures or traffic impacts. So we are attending and presenting at neighborhood association meetings, business organizations, interest groups, working with community-based organizations, and taking particular care to engage underserved communities and non-English speakers. For those who aren't able to attend in-person events, we're engaging digitally through project videos, live webinars, social media, and a project website that's updated every week with current construction impacts. You'll see later in the presentation the types of big impacts that we have ahead of us, and we'll continue to utilize these tools to keep the community engaged. Next slide. I did want to mention this real quickly, which is that before I turn it over to Tova, we have some encouraging climate action news to share with you, which is that this is the first project in Oregon utilizing these new diesel emission standards for non-road equipment like backhoes, excavators, dozers, and loaders. And ODOT construction section is actually going to be giving you an update on the new requirement and the reporting system early next year. But I wanted to tell you right now that as we're doing our tracking tools and evaluating those right now, this project is on schedule to meet those new standards. So we're making progress, and it's exciting to see it moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tova Peltz to share with you some slides and photos and descriptions of what's happening on the ground right now.
Thanks, Ryan. Good morning. We're going to talk about our first construction season, which isn't official. It hasn't officially been a year yet. It's just opened 11 months ago. So kind of crazy. So safety is always at the top of our minds. We encourage people to slow down, pay attention, not be distracted by the surrounding construction activities. We do this through our speed reduction, our traffic control devices, and our partnership with Beaverton and Tigard police departments to provide work zone enforcement, and then all of our project messaging. On the construction front, everything's progressing as expected. Our contractor, Kerr, has been aggressively pursuing the work and looking for every opportunity to make good use of our dry weather. One example of their hustle has been their targeted use of lane closures to allow multiple phases of work to get done at once. So there have definitely been points driving through the corridor where it looks like the entire project is underway, which is intense and also pretty amazing. Generally, the work is happening from north to south, and we appreciate everyone's patience as it's been very congested, and there is a lot of work going on there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sound walls to get started. So first, or next slide, I should say. A lot of effort this year has gone towards building the sound walls, as Ryan mentioned before, which are designed to mitigate highway noise for neighbors. As we mentioned earlier, the neighbors voted for these walls and are very supportive of them. There are 5 sound walls totaling over 100,000 square feet, and 3 of those walls were already completed, and the remaining 2 are on schedule to be completed this calendar year. These sound walls boast ODOT's first use of a newly developed sound absorbing material, which is pretty exciting as well. Next slide. So now let's talk about auxiliary lane construction. The first part of work is to construct the outer auxiliary lanes so we can shift traffic out to complete all of the median median work moving forward. You can see this in the photos, the earthwork side of building the aux lanes as well as the paving. Much of our work this past year has been earthwork. We've been excavating a lot of soil and building the area back up with rock and then asphalt in order to support the new aux lanes. So far, we've excavated about 83,000 cubic yards of soil and material, which, like for reference, is dump truck carries 10 yards of material. That's 8,000 trucks that have been hauling soil off of the project. You may have seen activity and soil in the I-5, I-205 interchange area, which is where we are hauling that material and storing it, which saves disposal costs and haul time for the project. The aux lanes are being built segment by segment. The first segment we're building is between Allen and Shoals Ferry Road, and we're about halfway complete in that section. Next slide, please. Thanks. We have a lot of bridge work on this project. One example is the new bridge over Fano Creek, which will carry the frontage road between Allen and Denny on adjacent to 217 southbound. Crews started pile driving for the bridge supports last month, and we're working towards opening the new frontage road in 2023. This is a really tight area. The frontage road is squeezed between the highway and the adjacent railroad tracks. So construction is requiring a lot of coordination with the railroad so we don't get in each other's way. Next slide. We're also installing a new stormwater treatment system for the highway, which is a huge undertaking. In the past, very little of the stormwater that drains off of 217 has been treated. The project stormwater treatment facilities are a significant upgrade for us and for protecting the Tualatin River watershed. As with all of our projects, we need to do the underground utility work before tackling all the work at the surface. So there was a lot of work this last year to focus on the underground utilities, relocations, adjustments, and installing new fiber optic lines as well. Next slide. We had our first major traffic impact about 2 months ago, where in order to strengthen the shoulder to build the new aux lane, we had to close one of the 2 lanes on 217 southbound for 11 consecutive days. It was a huge all hands on deck effort with a lot of coordination between ODOT staff, the contractor, and our local partners. We knew this would cause some pretty big backups on 217 southbound, which is just one example of the kind of trade-offs we make as we design the sequencing for our projects. This work needed to get done, and there just wasn't enough room in the tight footprint to do it without impacting that right lane. So we did a lot of careful planning and a lot of outreach to prepare the traveling public for what was ahead. And in the end, the work went really smoothly. The final product was great. Most people were not surprised by the impacts, and the contractor was able to open the lane back up about 12 hours early. In these pictures, you can see the progression. You can see some of those 8,000 dump trucks hauling soil off the corridor, and then that new sub base. The last piece of work we had to do for these closures was the paving. We also took advantage of the closure to get some additional work done near Shoals Ferry Road in order to minimize future impacts. Ultimately, the highway will be fully paved when the full width is built out by the end of 2025. But there are going to be a number of times where we do interim paving along the way. With the success of the first closure, we were feeling pretty confident we can duplicate this success on upcoming impacts. And in a minute, I'll talk a bit more about those. So next slide, please. I think one of my biggest lessons this year is how much time we've needed to invest in building our partnership with our contractor. And I guess maybe that wasn't so much a lesson as just like planning out the time and like creating time for us to sit down in person with our contractor multiple times over the course of the last year and make a plan for continuing to do that into the future. Building a solid relationship with Kerr for a 4-year project is really different than for a 1-season or 2-season project. So we've had some great in-person work sessions. We've had some in-person some social gatherings as well. I think all of that has been really valuable for the relationship building. And I meet on a regular basis with Kerr leadership. In fact, this morning on my way here, he gave me a call with some questions. So that is the business of tending the relationship. We've we've also gotten a lot of feedback from local agencies and from our own observations of traffic patterns. And we've allowed flexibility to adjust traffic control plans as needed. Some examples include adjusting signal timing and the use of temporary signs, modifying traffic control to allow the contractor to work multiple phases simultaneously, and adjusting the temporary barrier on I-5 adjacent to our soil stockpile to accommodate the new bus on shoulder effort by SMART. In an effort to minimize freight mobility lane restrictions, we've modified our ramp width reductions to allow freight to access destinations without needing significant detours. Next slide, please. Thanks. What you see here are the major work items that are due to be completed over the remainder of the project. One of these that's underway now and expected to be done in 2023 is building a new frontage road, which includes introducing a new traffic pattern to drivers. Building the aux lanes is an ongoing process and it's being done segment by segment. There's all the bridge work we talked about, the Hall Boulevard overpass widening in Beaverton, the Hall Boulevard overpass replacement in Tigard, and then the final the last effort to do the final paving. This list isn't necessarily in the order that it's going to happen. The sequencing and scheduling of the work is up to our contractor. So it's not going to look exactly like this, but last slide here. Next slide. Thanks. So with all of this work comes some unavoidable traffic impacts. As you said, we got through our first major impact, and there are some other big ones in front of us, including months-long closures of ramps and bridges. Our next expected big impact is a 5-month closure of the Denny ramps, planned to begin, which is expected to begin in the first quarter of 2023. And that will advance the frontage road construction. Our community affairs staff will continue to engage people so they're well informed of the impacts long before they happen. We've accomplished a lot in this first year and we have a lot ahead of us. We really appreciate your time and are open to questions.
Questions? I've got a couple. So first, great map.
That wasn't exciting.
Thank you.
Second, when we were doing, and by we, I mean you guys, were doing the work at the intersection of I-5 and I-84 and the ramp, we had a playlist, music playlist.
Yes.
So people that were in congestion could listen to music. Do we have that?
We're currently taking suggestions for the
Got a
2017
list.
playlist.
I'm gonna slip you just a list, okay? More seriously, I'm not gonna ask you a question to distinguish good public partners from bad public partners, but I'm thinking a lot about that because I think it makes a difference very seriously. And out here, we seem to have it. So, and in a lot of other places in the state. But we have a few needs improvement cases, I think. So we have to keep working on getting there with every project in every part of the state. So here are the specific questions. When we finish this work in 3.2 years from now, will there be other pieces of 217 above the northern termini of this project and below the southern termini that are yet to be done, or will we basically have 217 buttoned up for a while?
Chairman Brockland, there's a couple projects that are still on the to-do list. One of those is right at Beaverton Hillsdale Highway. There's, as you know, there the overcrossing is pretty narrow. We need to carry the lanes through there. We'd also like to do a braided ramp in the southbound direction. This is something that's been on the 217 corridor list for a very long time. Our partners at Washington County and ODOT have been advocating it to keep it in the RTP and make sure that that's on our radar as one of the next projects to do. It's another $100 million project, so it's one of those on the list of it may be a while, And then in the southbound direction, or on the southern end of the project, there's still a number of elements of a study that was done quite some time ago around 217 and the I-5 interchange. And there's a little bit of work to do there between 99W and I-5. But this is expected to be kind of a very significant improvement. It's going to make safety and operations on this corridor much better. And we expect that, those other projects to be several years out. They're not on our to-do list right after this, but we would like to start thinking about design potentially. And as we look towards another funding package at some point in the future, there is still a little more work to do on 217.
I know that bridge that you're referring to that goes over the Beaverton and Canyon. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that I can see how that's not where it needs to be long-term. So the last question I had was, you said, I think that 217 is congested 6 hours northbound and on average and 10 hours southbound. So how do you define congested? Is it an average miles per hour per vehicle, or how?
That's a good question. And there's actually quite a bit of conversation going on about that exact question. As we look into the RTP moving forward, we're redefining some of our definitions of congestion and of reliability and of our needs, particularly for the region. So our corridor bottleneck study, as I recall, was it's somewhere around 75% of posted speed. That's one of the measures we use for congestion. The one that we're starting to look at now in terms of reliability, and I was just on the JPAC call this morning having conversations about this, is how do you define need? And in the RTP, it's going to be defined as 35 miles an hour for 4 hours a day. And the reason they use the 35 miles an hour is that's not our target speed. That's not our performance standard. That's not what we want to see. Reliably slow is not our goal. But when it gets to be less than 35 miles an hour, when you have that little crash or the little fender bender or some other little hiccup, you immediately jump into a really stop and go traffic. You basically, the system just collapses. And that's bad everywhere, because now you have vehicles going everywhere and extended travel times, bad for the environment and a range of other things. But that was probably more than you asked for. But
No,
I wanted
that's
to give you
interesting.
a little
Okay,
picture.
that's all I had. Other comments, questions? Thank you both very much, not just for this, but for everything you're doing other than this, related to this project. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and so we'll be in recess till 10:30.
Yeah. Wondering what that playlist. Probably not.
Playlist. Let's get a playlist.
A little bit.
You're like, boom. And I'm like, no, you forgot. That's it's water cream on it. That was sort of felt
coffee.
like,
Where is,
we're not, you and I don't get along.
Oh.
Like that got.
Yes.
I love coffee. It just doesn't love me back. No pressure.
Cooper, have you seen Julie?
She's right there.
Oh, okay, great.
She's changed positions.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to reconvene
Amanda, can you tell them?
and have a report on the Great Streets Program. A report, not a map.
I have no maps.
No map. Yeah, I
Sorry.
know.
Next time, I'll bring
Next time.
maps next time, I
Next time,
promise.
a map on the Great Streets Program, Transportation Division Administrator Karen Criswell. Karen, thank you.
Good morning, Chair Van Brockman, Vice Chair Brown, Commissioners. Karen Criswell, Public Transportation Division Administrator, here to give you an update on the future of ODOT funding programs, the Great Streets Program. Selling it big right out of the gates, folks. The update that I have for you today is just an update on where we're at in the process so far, what we've accomplished, and really what we're learning so far. An update on the project selection criteria, as well as the process ahead and the composition of the project recommendation committee. Next, please. By way of brief background, you'll recall that ODOT funding streams are sliced really thinly, and it can be really difficult to piece together funding from multiple streams to have a comprehensive corridor approach that really supports moving people within communities as well as connecting people between communities. Really in a safe, convenient way for people who are biking, walking, using transit, as well as folks who are driving on those corridors. Some of the examples of challenges that we know people experience when they're walking and biking or trying to access transit on arterials is that there are gaps in our sidewalk system. There are gaps in our bike lanes. There's limited crossing opportunities of our highways. And there's also missing connections to parallel routes that further connect people into the communities that they're traveling in. Next, please. So to be eligible for Great Streets funding, the primary objective of the proposed project is that it must improve both safety and multimodal access. ODOT will be pulling data from existing programs like the All Roads Transportation Safety Program to help us identify needed elements in project corridors. So when it comes to safety, for example, we know that there are certain risk factors that make our roadways more difficult for walkers and cyclists. Traffic speeds, volumes, distance between crossings are all factors that contribute to crashes. And we know that there are proven countermeasures that have shown to significantly reduce the likelihood of those incidents. When it comes to accessibility, we're using our active transportation needs inventory, the blueprint for urban design, to help identify how to fully integrate accessibility into the project. So when you're narrowly focused on a single mode, you can miss those points of connection. With the kinds of projects that we're trying to develop here, if a curb ramp needs to be upgraded, we also want to make sure that users can safely cross the road. They can safely then go travel down the other side to get to that bus stop or that business that they're trying to get to in their community. Next, please. Project proposals should include a combination of both infrastructure updates that improve those safety and connectivity outcomes, but they also is an opportunity to bring the entire corridor up to a state of good repair. The list that you're seeing on the screen isn't a comprehensive or exhaustive list, and not every project needs to meet every element. Next, please. So the evaluation and criteria and the weighting. So as you can see, safety and multimodal accessibility are the most heavily weighted among the criteria. The other criteria that are right below that are the equity considerations as well as the climate mitigation considerations. And then the bottom 25% of the scoring is around local support and engagement. These projects are about the communities that our roadways are serving and helping people within those communities to meet their travel needs. So that local engagement and support is incredibly important. We're also looking at leverage opportunities. So if we have another planned project
in that area, or if the local agencies are partnering with us and bringing resources to bear on the project as well. Project readiness and then state of good repair are the final two considerations. Next, please. Also important for us, we're not scoring it, but we expect that as regions are developing the projects, that they are taking freight needs into consideration. They're looking at things like whether it's a reduction review route and how are they able to accommodate the various modes of travel. On the topic of jurisdictional transfer, I think ODOT really recognizes that we have an owner responsibility for these roadways. And I think sometimes there's a bit of debate as to whether a road belongs within our authority or within the authority of a local agency. I think the expectation with a lot of these projects, or the majority, is that they would continue to be in our ownership. And it's really an opportunity for us to, I think, step up and be something different in different communities to meet the evolving needs as these communities have grown up around our highways. Now, if there is interest and intent for a local jurisdiction, they want to take over the jurisdiction of that roadway, we would certainly make that part of the process and just negotiate with the local jurisdiction as to who actually delivers the project. But I think this is really an opportunity for ODOT to, with this proof of concept, show what we can do in terms of delivering a slightly different type of project. Next, please. A question for you. Yes. What's a Commissioner. reduction review? That refers to some statutory language, and I'll try to not get too far out on my lane, and Matt can correct me if I get anything wrong. But under ORS 366-215,
He's getting out of his chair.
there are requirements. ODOT has requirements. It's referred to as the hole in the air requirement. And so we have a stakeholders forum where projects that might impact that hole in the air. And it's basically intended to guarantee that over dimension loads, freight of certain sizes can continue to travel and move on our corridors. So it's a bit of a check and a balance on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
nailed it. So I've had too much coffee, my apologies. Maybe just enough, I'm not sure. So the process that we're using for the project review team is a little bit different than I think we've done historically with most of our ODOT projects. We have a project review team, and this is the team that's going to be making recommendations to the commission on which projects to fund. So we have 10 staff members, ODOT staff members, that come from varying areas of subject matter expertise that you would need to bring to bear on a project like this. And we've also identified positions for 2 at-large ODOT staff members. We see that as a great opportunity to build understanding within the agency, and also potentially bring some different perspectives to the table that you maybe wouldn't otherwise involve. Similarly, we've identified slots for 6 community members, 2 from our, 1 from the Bike Pit Advisory Committee, 1 from the Public Transportation Advisory Committee. And right after Thanksgiving, we're going to be going out and doing an open call for community members to invite their participation on this process. And we're going to be looking for folks who have some lived experiences related to travel in those kinds of corridors, who can come and be part of the project review team to give our subject matter experts some additional, hopefully, depth and understanding of local concerns and issues. Next, please. So where we're at in the process right now, over the summer, our program manager was busy doing engagement and developing the program guidance, internal engagement, as well as some external engagement. You can see where regions have been doing engagement with their ACTs and other potential partners to start to identify potential projects. Regions submitted their pre-applications on November 1st. And now we're in a process where there's a technical kind of advisory group who's reviewing those pre-applications and then getting ready to provide feedback to the regions in terms of how they can strengthen those projects to better meet the program goals and criteria. Regions will then submit complete proposals in February. And then the project review team will meet and get those applications down to 150% list. So similar to what we do with our STIP processes, other STIP processes. Then revised and updated proposals will be due
later in the summer of 2023, and the project review team will meet a second time to get down to 100% project list recommendation. And then we'll be coming to the commission in fall of 2023 for your review and approval as part of the regular fall STIP amendment. Next, please. So this is the fun part. It's almost as good as a map, I think, Chair. So what we're
It is good.
it's exciting. So we received 21 pre-applications from regions. The total request was 141 million. So that makes this program oversubscribed by 400%. And that's using the $35 million figure per your consent agenda approval earlier. 15 million from Great Streets is now allocated to the Outer Powell project to help keep that important project on track and to keep those multimodal elements funded as part of that project. The average request was 6.7 million and the average cost per mile, Great Streets are not cheap, is about 4.8 million per mile based on the applications we've received. One of the other things I want to.
So is that because there's so much to do to bring them up to standard? Is that the problem?
That would be my speculation, but I am not familiar with the applications,
Okay.
but I think it's a good theory.
Okay.
I know, is Julie coming over here?
No.
Okay.
Julie is processing those numbers.
She needs a moment.
We're helping.
Suck it by herself.
We're helping. One of the things that we often hear are with all of our programs when we're applying an equity lens, that there's this concern that when you do that, all of the funds are going to go to Portland, to areas where we have urban arterials. But what we saw through the applications we've received from regions is an MPA stands for Metropolitan Planning Area. So with all of the projects that were completed, only that were submitted, five were within a metropolitan planning area, 16 were outside of metropolitan planning areas. When we looked at our colleagues, when we looked at their applications, 7 of the 21 were situated in areas of high social disparity or high need when you look at our social equity index map. And so I think that's important to acknowledge that. And ironically, or maybe not ironically, if you know the state, the projects that were submitted, the one that had the highest social equity index is a project in Region 5. So might be a little counterintuitive to some, so I wanted to point that out. I think one of the observations the program managers had that I also wanted to share is we're also seeing that where there was recent community engagement, community conversations, such as a recent planning effort, the application quality was extremely high with really specific, significant detail around the project elements that are needed. So I know that's one of our challenges is getting projects developed to a place of readiness where you are ready to go. And with this program, it is requiring us to look at things maybe a little bit differently than we have before. So I think it's been, and I think the process is set up nicely to really provide support to regions or project managers where they might need it and help with fostering the Great Streets goals. And next, please. And with that, that concludes my update.
Questions, comments? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I maybe just would add one more thing because
Sure.
It's just another thank you to the commission. I promise, just one more. Another thank you to the
They have
commission.
just right down the hall, place where you can get one of these.
Good. Another thank you to the commission
This will be
for
better.
funding this program and for giving us the opportunity to really try to address some of these corridor needs in a comprehensive fashion. I know when I look at projects and I talk to folks in region, they're funding projects and piecemealing things together from, 8, 10 different funding streams. It's laborious, time consuming, and just a real challenge. So this is a tremendous opportunity for ODOT. So thank you.
I do have a comment after that.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. It's clear that this program, similar to the Safe Routes to School program, seems to be overwhelmingly appreciated and desired. And so I think it's a good illustration of when we kind of start thinking outside the traditional, hey, we're going to build highways. We really have a good impact on the entire state. And so we need to think, how are we going to be able to continue and enhance some of these programs that are clearly very desired in our communities?
Yeah, really good point. And I think it also recognizes the local governments are under, we have financial pressures. They have significant financial pressures. And so when we can work together to try and find a way forward, that's how we should be working. And I think that is how we just heard in the 2017 report about how we're working, but that's on a large highway. There are a number of projects that are more suitable for this. So I agree.
Yeah.
With Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
Yes.
Just one word, we were just talking over the break about all this great and new work that is occurring, and that the department, like many employers, is down substantially with respect to staff. I think it's about 30% vacancies right now. So I just want to acknowledge that you all are moving big projects, many projects forward, and that's to everyone at ODOT. And I recognize the strain on the workforce, and hope that we can be helpful as well, and let us know if we can be helpful in helping to alleviate this workforce shortage.
Thank you, Commissioner. Much appreciated.
Good comment. Other comments or questions for Karen? Okay, thank you for your time, your presentation. Very interesting. So we will move forward to our next topic, which is Powell Boulevard. And the report there from Cooper and Ryan, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Cooper, are you going to stay over there? Are you going to move over there?
Probably
As
just for
director, you
convenience sake.
have total discretion on the room.
Well, I'll take advantage of that and maybe stay seated here then.
That way.
Director for a day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, so we are here before you, myself, again, for the record, Cooper Brown, Assistant Director for Operations. I'm joined by my colleague, Region One Manager, Ryan Winsheimer. We're going to walk through some of the improvements that we're making on Inner Powell. Division Administrator Chris Well spoke a little bit in her last presentation about some of the work on Outer Powell. There is more work that we're doing on Inner Powell, and it segues nicely from the conversation we just had about Great Streets programs. I will be brief in my comments and then turn the bulk of the presentation over to Mr. Winsheimer. Next slide, please. So as you all know, many of our state highways across the entire state, many of the crashes that occur on our facilities, on our system, occur on ODOT's portion of it, right? Across the state. That's certainly the case in Portland as it is elsewhere. Powell Boulevard, US 26, is one of those corridors within Portland where we have seen high rates of crashes. These roads, Powell being one of them, were designed in a different time for a different purpose. They were really, as we often talk about, designed more for throughput, more with speed in mind, more with throughput utility as the goal. The communities around these facilities have changed, and they certainly changed around Portland. And we, as an agency, as Division Administrator Chris Well spoke about in the last presentation, have a responsibility to ensure that those facilities are changing with those communities and with the needs of those facilities. Powell is not the only roadway on our system where we're confronted with this, as you know. But we are making some improvements here that we wanted to take some time to talk about today. You and some of the questions that you were asking, I think, highlight the fact that this is to make the improvements around multimodal need, safety improvements in particular, as Division Administrator Chris Well said, doing great streets is not cheap work. It requires investment, and we have programs, thanks to your leadership, like Great Streets, that are going to help us do that. As Division Administrator Chris Well just described, we also, I wanted to remind you, you've given us the charge back last year to look at how we make quick, rapid improvements, safety improvements on corridors that have high crash rates. This was on the heels of some unfortunate crashes that happened on 82nd Avenue. You may recall you identified a handful of corridors across the state where we invested $10 million to those improvements. You also charged us to come back to you with a bit more of a game plan on how we're going to do that more expeditiously moving forward. The team has been working, I'd say, feverishly on that over the past year, and we anticipate bringing that forward to you early next year for a conversation. So that's just a piece of this larger puzzle on how we do this important work. Next slide, please. Turning to Powell Boulevard, though, Inner Powell, I think most of you are aware, if you were paying attention to the media, there were some very tragic incidents that happened on Powell in the recent past. In early October, there was a horrible fatality that happened right outside of Cleveland High School, where a cyclist was killed by a truck. Since then, unfortunately, there's been additional fatalities in the region and additional incidents. Before these incidents, ODOT had already been making safety improvements on Powell in the vicinity of Cleveland High School to include reducing the speed limit, as you see on the slide, from 35 miles per hour to 30. There were also other improvements like protected turn lanes, signal optimization, and other things that were done. And as a result of that, we did see crashes decrease, as you can see on the chart in the vicinity that we're talking about today. But clearly more is needed because these crashes have persisted. And so I will turn it over to Mr. Winsheimer to talk through what that more is that we're doing in this space, and then we can have more of a dialogue. So Ryan.
Thank you, Assistant Director Brown. Ryan Winsheimer, ODOT Region 1 Manager. Again, to Cooper's point, I think that the chart he showed the safety improvements that we recently made in this area are working, and they're significantly reducing crashes in this area from something like, it was like 13 a year, 8 a year, down to 1. But there's still things we need to do, and obviously we're still seeing some significant crashes, and we need to make some changes. We got together with our partners at the City of Portland, talked about what could we do immediately? And that's not how we normally approach these types of things. We have a data-driven process. We think about it across the entire state. We think about prioritizing those dollars based on data over a long period of time. But we need to be more responsive. We need to figure out how can we go tackle at least the low dollar things quicker and more efficiently. And this is a week we got a lot of good experience on 82nd. And those gave us some of these tools that we're applying here today. One of them that we didn't apply on 82nd and had already had some school zones there, but in this particular case at high schools, applying school zones isn't typical. But we looked at it and said, why not? Let's go ahead and try to do that here. Let's look at trying to reduce the speed down to 20 miles an hour when students are present. And so we're working with the City of Portland to implement that. Within days of the most recent crash, we were able to go add some high visibility striping, improve that stuff. Our striping crews were out there and immediately got that in. City of Portland has some temporary speed feedback signs up, and we're looking to deploy those though throughout the corridor. So we need to spend some time, go do the analysis with the city and look at where we can do those. And of course, additional signage and leading pedestrian interval. Leading pedestrian interval, for those that are familiar, is essentially when you hit the pedestrian button to walk, it keeps all the lights red and allows pedestrians to enter the intersection in a way that when drivers then begin their turn, they're going to notice people more regularly. So those are some of the things that we're going to look at and doing quickly. Next slide. Some of the longer term improvements we're looking at doing, ODOT has some safety grant programs that deal with education. We'd really like, and again, that's one of the things that's not typically done. at some of the high schools. We're really encouraging, in this case, an expansion of that. And to the city of Portland's credit, they're actually already implementing that at Park Rose. We're saying, hey, let's go do that here at Cleveland High School. Let's talk about how we can educate and provide some additional visibility around safety. We're doing the high visibility striping. We're not just looking at Cleveland High School, but we're looking to deploy that at all of the schools along Powell. And then, as I think we're going to get to in a second, the next slide, we're going to look at doing that across the city. Anywhere there's a school adjacent to a ODOT-owned facility, shouldn't we be doing that? How could we go do that? Funding's an issue, so we need to be. We're working hard on trying to figure out how do you find that, and so you can do it. We're also looking at implementing photo speed radar. So we have some red light cameras on a few of our facilities in partnership with local jurisdictions, but auto speed enforcement is not something that we've done. That's something we're looking to do in this case here with the city of Portland, and then looking to expand that again. And as you know, right now it's very difficult. It's challenging to hire enforcement. And if we don't have enforcement out there, people are going to take advantage of that. And so if we can figure out another tool, photo enforcement may be that tool that can really help us remind drivers that we really need to be paying attention, and particularly in school zones. Next slide. We're talking about, I mentioned this already, but the suitability of school zones on the rest of the arterials within the city of Portland. And if we're successful in that, that might be something we want to think about, thinking about how do we deploy that around the rest of the state as well, and not just in the city of Portland, but that's our first task is let's go try to tackle that with Portland. We're developing cost estimates for some of those longer terms. We also have some improvements that we've identified through road safety edits and other things already. We're going to try to dust some of those off and see if there's incremental ones we might be able to go deliver sooner. We're also looking at what about a road diet, for example, in this area. Be particularly challenging. There's huge volumes. Where do those cars go? What are the impacts? But we need to take the time and actually analyze that and determine, is that the right approach? And if not, then how else might you tackle that? But we're willing to think about really slowing folks down in order to achieve the safety objective. The city of Portland is looking at analyzing freight routes. Right now, they have vehicles turning south from Powell onto 26. It's a very tight. 26 is a very tight road, a challenging place for freight to be. We're going to look and see, is there a better place for them to be, and is there a way to direct them? They can still reach their destinations, but maybe not turning at the school and at that particular location. And then we need to talk about funding. And I know you have directed us to think about that in terms of how do we come up with a more responsive, faster funding program. But we also need to think about longer term, how do we increase our safety funding for the other standard programs that we have, so that we can get to more of these. It's a big topic at the regional table as well. I'm continuing to encourage Metro and our regional partners to dedicate funding towards safety and towards really making sure that we're doing that, particularly for vulnerable modes, access to transit, bikes and pets. So just some of the things we're working on.
And if I may just add a underscore, I guess, a point or two before we open it up for questions. Ryan talked about, and you can see on the slide, part of the work that we're doing with PBOT does include looking at additional improvements needed for jurisdictional transfer. But, I think Division Administrator Criswell said it well. We recognize that there's plenty that we can do now to make the facility safer. And so we're really leaning into that work, and the team is. And so kudos to them. I think that was the main thing I wanted to hit. So happy to answer questions. Next slide, please, about any of this work.
Questions or comments? Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. Could you go back to the last slide? I think it's great that you're taking the time to analyze school zone suitability for schools on arterials within Portland. I sure would like to see that expanded across the state, because it's not just in the city of Portland where this is an issue. And I know it's a resource allocation, but maybe we can leverage our local partners, our local administrators, our local acts to see if they can help us identify these areas, because these are everywhere. And if we can do a little bit to make it safer for kids to get to school crossing our facilities, I think that's a well-spent effort.
Yeah, very good point. Other questions or comments? Sure. Vice
One-
Chair?
One of the things that they're doing in the Medford area is that they are using the enforcement through camera. And it has really slowed down some of the problems in some of the intersections that we've had areas of people running lights also in school zones. And I know even for our transit system, I received those tickets. And it's real interesting to see the response of the driver because they don't realize sometimes that they're doing it. And so I can guarantee you after you pay, I think it was $169 ticket the other day that I saw, after they pay that a few times, it slows them down. So I'm for enforcement like that.
If I might respond for just a second, when we did photo enforcement on the interstate for speed zones, for work zones, and we did some photo enforcement. And one of the things I was insistent on is including a flyer with the ticket that said, this is work zones. This is why they're dangerous. This is what happens in these areas. And it was an opportunity to educate those drivers as well as the ticket, but also just the opportunity to describe why that was important. And because I do think sometimes folks drive through areas and they don't know, or they didn't recognize, but I think there's an opportunity for education there too.
Mr. Smith?
Just to follow up on that, I agree with Julie that I think photo enforcement is important, but I think if we were to implement that, I think we need to be careful on enforcement and that we don't have a disproportionate impact on people of lower income. And so I really appreciate the education component, and maybe it could be a two-step. Could be your first one is education and warning, and your next one is a fine. So just keep those things in mind.
Good point.
Great.
Yeah, I guess I would just add one comment, which is all three of my wife and I's children are Cleveland High graduates. We've been volunteers there back to when they started going there. I was there last night talking to students. And it's and I want to pick up on the comments about statewide, and this is Commissioner Smith's comment that this is everywhere. I mean, there are lots of examples around the state, so I don't want to personalize it to this. But I think one of the analysis that needs to occur is what are all of the factors in the area. So here you have an active trucking zone. It's near a major rail terminal. You know, there's a lot going on down there that is rail, truck. You have the Fred Meyer headquarters, kitty corner from the high school. I mean, it's not a great place for a high school, but it's been there since 1926. So we're probably not moving it anytime soon. And see if you could convene, you know, representatives from the trucking industry and the rail industry and Fred Meyer and a whole range of interests. And it would be in Bend, a different group, but it would be a group, and try and think comprehensively. Obviously, the enforcement comes from government, but you know, is there a way to, and you've got some of these things up there, reroute trucks, use other, get some of that out of 26th and Powell to somewhere else. It's got a city park there between the high school and the Fred Meyer headquarters is a city park. So there's a lot of complexity in that area. And I think it could be a model for bringing all parties, public and private, together and saying, nobody wants to see this. This woman who was killed was a chef and a restaurateur. I actually met her a couple of times. Really dynamic person, very creative. This kind of person that we lost in this instance. Another time it would be a student. It would be a, you know, it could be any of us. So it's you know, it's just a loss, no matter who it is. That's very significant. So I do think this kind of going back to your presentation on 217 and all of the effort there to kind of pull people together in these areas where there is a large educational enterprise going on. Those seem like areas we should be trying to make sure we're really talking at an intensified level about safety, because there's a lot of traffic through there. You have a corporate headquarters, you have a high school, you have a lot of activity converging there because of that. And so, but part of what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is there's also an opportunity in that to convene people and say, we got a problem. We want to hear what you have to say about that and how you have been thinking about this, because it got quite a bit of publicity. So I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. And I think it's situation to situation, but I think it's an important thing to think broadly about actors and what they might do differently and how they might route their traffic. And when our girls were going through there, we had very specific rules, like you don't cross Powell and you don't cross 26th, go to Clinton, go north, which is a lot calmer than 26th and Powell. But again, to Sharon's point and Julie's point, it's different in each community, each school is different, each situation is different. So I like this idea of just getting small teams that can quickly convene and say, what can we do right away? Obviously, the city and the state are the first stops, but they're not the last stops.
So if I may just to comment on those remarks, Mr. Chair, failed to mention, but to your point about the engagement around this work, we've had really strong legislative leadership on Powell after the incidents in early October. Senator Taylor, Representative Nose, and Representative Power convened a town hall that we participated in. Director Strickler was there, as well as the directors of all the other relevant agencies. And that leadership is pulling together the table that you're describing in a lot of ways with all of the community. And we got tremendous feedback from that town hall, which happened, I believe, at the end of October. And so I think it is a model to replicate, whether it's being convened by our legislative leaders or whether we do it at the agency level in these other areas. I think it is will be a model to potentially replicate. And we've had tremendous partnership on this. We probably didn't underscore that enough with PBOT, with TriMet, with PPS, because they all have a role to play in this particular area and then the improvements that we're talking about there.
Good report, good work, and hopefully we can take these ideas to scale in some way around, in worst cases around the state to start with, and then beyond that. Okay, thank you very much. Next, Suzanne Carlson, our climate office director, is here to give us an update on our climate efforts.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Brooklyn, Vice Chair Brown, and Commissioners. Suzanne Carlson, Climate Office Director. As you know, I come before you to update you on the work of the Climate Office. So today we'll be focusing on two big things, which is our resilience roadmap and a medium heavy duty incentives report. So first slide. Our climate adaptation and resilience roadmap, we've been working on this for several years and we're reaching the final stages here. So I'll preview some of the information in it for you today. Seeing an increase in hazards, increase in extreme weather, and we want to work across ODOT to prepare for that and to create more resiliency in our system. These type of investments protect critical infrastructure from climate hazard impacts, enhance reliability and safety, improve efficiency and management, and reduce the burden on operations and maintenance. Some of what we looked at was some of that maintenance and operation data and how we can improve there. So this is in line with our strategic action plan, transportation plan, and I think importantly, will prepare us to be competitive for some funding opportunities. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this has been getting a little feedback here. This has been a multi-year effort. It's mostly internally focused on a lot of internal interviews and conversations throughout ODOT, as well as looking at data and looking at the impacts that we've seen over the past years, and then also at climate hazard data and historic data, as well as projected data. And so as you see on the slide here, we're moving into the finalization of that roadmap. We will be submitting to FHWA because of some of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act opportunities. We can get a reduced match if we submit a resilience plan, and then we'll also be sharing final with you and moving into implementation for 2023. Next slide. So this is just a quick, maybe a refresher that many of us have lived through these. I'm a more recent Oregonian, but we know that we've seen increased floods. We've seen wildfires that have impacted people and their communities, ice storms, heat waves, landslides. These are all more extreme events, and some of them are interrelated. We're seeing more landslides because of wildfires. We're seeing things exacerbate when we see these impacts in our communities and also along our transportation corridors. Next slide. So the part of the report is going to be a statewide risk assessment, and some of the results that we're seeing out of 9 hazards, we are seeing an increase in risk for 6 of these. So as just noted, the hot days, inland flooding will become especially acute, increased wildfire, particularly in regions 1 and 2, more coastal flooding. We're really looking at some big impacts with sea level rise and coastal erosion along our coast and the communities there. And then a couple just sort of less impacts, not to say that there won't be concerns, but not as much increase in risk in heavy precipitation, snow days, and daily freeze thaw. We just called out a couple of the highlights here. Some of these costs, some of you are probably familiar that the wildfire costs were high, some of the costs to respond to floodings. And so we're wanting to get a better take on that data, get that data organized inside ODOT in a way that we can make better use of it, and look at where these costs are happening and be able to not only respond, but get out ahead of that and make investments in these places where we're going to drive down some costs. As you know and live, we'll also see delays when we see those types of closures in our roadway network. And on the coast, the hazards really work together to create increased concern. So you've got erosion, you see the wildfire, and then the landslides that happen, and these sort of all build on each other in that particularly sensitive region. Next slide. Next slide. There we go.
Colors.
So here, just highlighting a bit, we're going to have strategies and actions. And again, this is mostly internally focused, and the Climate Office, being in the Policy Data and Analysis Division, is sort of the policy side of this. So bringing together the partners, facilitating these conversations, and then working with implementing divisions on how can we change policies, how can we change communication. And I say change, but it's really building on a lot of work that's been done, a lot of successful work. How do we deploy resources? How do we, maybe borrow manpower in times when we need quicker response? So a lot of things that we were doing and have been doing to prepare us for more success. Building resiliency into the way we do business, so building that into designs, into funding opportunities. If we're already making an investment somewhere, how do we make that more resilient, and making sure that we're making the best use of each dollar? So a couple examples of things that we've been doing is rapid response to emergencies, the post-event recap, and how do we learn from the experiences, proactive signage and communication when we've got those closures, sharing equipment, and then, as I mentioned, shifting personnel to be responsive. So next slide, map, there it is. So on the maps today.
I've detected the theme.
We sort of snuck it in there.
Beautiful
with other
thing.
things on the slide.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of our strategies alludes to this map. So we have some interactive climate hazard risk maps, and then we've also pulled from that, where do we want to make our priority investments? So that's what we're showing on the map here, is if we were to pull from climate hazards, again, historic and projected, ODOT priority corridors already, as you know, which is prioritizing where there's going to be the biggest system disruption, the most impact to freight as well as people traveling, and then also social equity. Where do we see? So to walk through that, tier 1 is really our highest climate hazards, our highest our highest social equity impacts, and then our highest economic impacts from these disruptions. Tier 2 is looking at those top climate and disruptive impacts with the lower factors of social equity. So that's sort of the second tier. And then third tier would be maybe not as much economic disruption, these lower volume corridors that do have that higher social equity and concerns where those closures might be more impactful. It might be lifeline routes for communities, or it might be just really critical transportation corridors that are off the, not the beaten track, but off those priority ODOT corridors, making sure we look at those and look at those for investments as well. And next slide. So then looking at how do we use this information, right now we have the PROTECT funds, as you recall, that we got from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we've got formula funding, and we're piloting this approach in a sense to look at these prioritization of where we make investments and using the mapping tools that I just talked about. When we deliver this plan to FHWA, we will get a match reduction for those PROTECT funds. So that'll be a good win. We also get a little bit of match reduction for integrating into the long range plan. And so we're working closely with delivering operations into how do we use this information, then what do we learn from it as we start to roll it out. The other thing we're doing right now is modeling the economic impacts of some of these potential disruptions. So working with our modeling folks to look at a business case. So what's the cost of doing nothing? What does it start to look like if we're not making these investments, and what are these disruptions going to mean? Checks notes, cover everything, looks good. Next slide. And then that slide, the photo on the last slide was just an example. Upsizing culverts is a big one. So as we see more flooding and as roadways get washed out, that's a type of investment we would make. So this is just on next steps. I've talked about a few of these, but we really move into implementation beginning of 2023. So we'll be working across the agency on operational planning and implementation, as well as having some of the information from these economic impacts analysis, so that if and when we get dollars, to go after competitive grants as well as state opportunities, we have a sense of the benefits and the value of those implementation. And so that's next slide. I'm going to change topics here unless you want to ask questions on that topic before I jump over.
Questions, comments? Thank you for including the map. So medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle incentives report. This was requested by the legislature last session, and Department of Environmental Quality has really been leading on this and working closely with ODOT. So we've worked closely together on this report. You'll see here the language around what they requested. We've also done a lot of, I'll show on another slide, industry and stakeholder engagement. So this has been a good conversation and discussion with industry around what will it take to move forward to increase electrification of the medium and heavy duty sector. So the report will include some of that background on history and climate goals in the states, information about medium heavy duty vehicles and refueling, existing conditions. We look to other states, what are they doing with incentive programs, and I have a lot of information in there about what other states are doing that we can pull from for best practices. And then also, what did we hear? We conducted 2 listening sessions, and what did we hear from our stakeholders, as well as looking at some recommendations. Next slide. So this is just a fun visual. So this is what the medium and heavy duty vehicle classes look like. So you'll see on the left-hand side there, maybe some ODOT day-to-day vehicles, light duty or medium duty trucks, as well as cargo vehicles, kind of vehicles you see making deliveries in your neighborhood, and then moving on up to transit vehicles, school bus, and then heavy duty, more long distance type semi trucks. That's what we're looking at here. And it is can be a real challenge to electrify some of these vehicles, as you would imagine, because of where they operate, how they operate, what their day-to-day needs are, when they have time to refuel, where they refuel or charge, as it were. And then the weight of that battery infrastructure as well. If you're making that long distance haul and you've got those batteries in your vehicle as well. Next slide.
So existing conditions, we do have some incentive programs, some funding opportunities, and the vast majority, as you've heard many times at this stage, is around light duty vehicles and incentives and infrastructure. So there's been good progress, good investments there. And so looking to the medium and heavy duty sector, it's a little more challenging with the vehicles, as well as has not been the type of incentives available yet to really move the market. Next slide. So what we heard from the partners listening sessions is that incentives are needed to support this transition, as with the light duty sector, which is what we've really recognized in the past. Of course, and this is where ODOT really leads, is when you get those vehicles rolled out, you need that charging infrastructure, or rather vice versa, you need that charging infrastructure. And I see some fleet owners nodding here, right? You need that charging infrastructure before you make that investment. You need to know you can operate those vehicles where they're gonna, on the routes they're gonna be running. And so what we're hoping to do there is that there be multiple incentive systems, right? So there's vehicles with charging alone, and then public charging so that on route vehicles can charge. And so when we design these programs, we have a lot of learnings from other states that we can incorporate in the program design as well. Next slide. So next steps, this report is due to the legislature December 1st, and it will be making some recommendations around incentives, really, as I just mentioned, the different types of bundled and separated incentives, and suggestions on what the program design would look like. And we'll continue working with DEQ moving forward, and of course, working with industry and partners to support CEV adoption. Questions?
Questions, comments?
Oh, yes. I have lots of
Okay.
comments.
Vice Chair.
So last week I was actually at a conference in San Francisco on electric vehicles and looking at moving the medium and heavy duty vehicles in that direction. And one of the things that is really apparent to me is the federal government has put a lot of money out to buy those vehicles. So there's this huge push to start purchasing vehicles, and yet the fueling infrastructure is not there. And so I'm glad that we are taking a lead on this, but I think that we need to educate our legislators as they make decisions to move forward with climate action and moving our vehicles to zero emissions. We have to be responsible enough to realize that our power grid is not going to be able to handle the infrastructure needs. And I'll give you an example. In the Rogue Valley at the transit district, talking with Pacific Power, they could power 6 buses for us, and that is it. Anything beyond that is beyond the grid, and we have to wait or build a substation, which is going to cost us millions of dollars. So this is happening across. If you look at our state as a whole, you know, there's this encouragement for rural areas to buy electric vehicles, not knowing that they may not be able to charge them. This summer, I was at a conference where we talked with Missoula, Montana, and the transit system there, and they're having such problems that they're actually going down and plugging their vehicles in at the Walmart charging station because they can't handle what is needed. So I think that we need to be responsible and really look at what we're doing and then push back if we have to. So there's always this encouragement, you know, go ahead, apply for this money, get these vehicles, but are we going to have vehicles sitting in our yards that we can't power? And so for Public Transit Advisory Committee, and when they're looking at those applications, this is a reality. This is something. The other thing is it takes you about 2 years to get a bus. So you can imagine a heavy duty vehicle, 2 years. So we do have a window of opportunity right now to be pushing back and saying, hey, let's get the infrastructure. If you build it, they will come. Yes, it's true. But I mean, these are things that I really are near and dear to me, because for the Rogue Valley, we've used compressed natural gas for years. And that has been, you know, we've tried to stay ahead of the curve. And now we're at a place where we're being told by my board of directors, you need to move to electric. And I'm going, I don't have the infrastructure. So more to come, but I'm watching this closely because I think it is an opportunity for us to educate. So So Lindsay, you know, I'm always willing to do that education if need be, but that's just my comment. But thank you for bringing this.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions? I guess all I would kind of say to add on to what the vice chair said is this is an interesting phenomenon going on because we have climate leading to major private investment and decision making. So this isn't just a regulatory, kind of a typical government regulatory matter. We have to appreciate that. I don't know how many licensed drivers we have, or I don't know how many drivers we have, or owners or leasers of cars we have in the state, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. They're each decision makers, and we're trying to incentivize to some degree, mainly through programs DEQ is running, people to move to electric. But the big piece of the equation, I think, is the private, the automobile manufacturers are going to electric. And so I think, and I've been saying this for a long time, our challenge is to stay ahead of the curve here. And that includes, this isn't on mass transit vehicles, and this isn't on heavy duty trucks, which may end up, being with a different fuel type like hydrogen. But for light vehicles, cars, as we typically refer to them, we've got to be working actively, I know we are, with the power companies on the grid and with the auto manufacturers on what they're investing in. For example, I believe it's in the Roseburg area. Tesla's they're putting in like a 50, I think you and I, Amanda, have talked about this. I think they've got a 50 unit, charging effort or station, if you will, going on that they're building now. So this requires a level of interaction and coordination with the energy companies, public and private, and the auto manufacturers in terms of, they're coming into states, and we're a leading state for converting. We're like a top 3 state for converting over. So it's going to happen. It's happening. And as more choices are available and lower priced options are available in the auto sector. And the thing that I've been concerned about all along is, that we don't know how fast it's going to move, but it's going to move. And to Julie's point, we can't have people incentivized by the state government that's subsidizing the purchase of cars that then can't be operated because it's not our responsibility we didn't build the gas stations. So a lot of this cost is going to have to be borne by the auto manufacturers, but we have to understand the plan, and there has to be a coordinated plan, or there's going to be trouble ahead if we can't. I mean, that may be too dramatic, but there's going to be problems, I think, if we're not communicating at a high level so that we know where the power is coming from. Is the infrastructure in place to then connect up the tolling plazas, like this 50 unit plaza that's being built in, I think it's Douglas County somewhere off I-5. And that's a Tesla project. That's not an ODOT project. And that's not an energy company project. That's not like Pacific Power's project. That's Tesla's project. So it's an extraordinary opportunity. The main point is, I think it's coming. We don't know how fast and to what degree, but kind of my overall message is we have to do everything we can to stay ahead of it so that as the public is making this transition, we're providing them with opportunities. I mean, we have in place, in coordination with these other entities, a system that works for the traveling public. And that's, I think that's what the next 10 to 15 years on this particular topic will be all about. On climate, there are so many things to say about climate, which is an international issue.
Right.
And countries are going to have to get on board strategies to really address climate. But our little piece of climate, I think right now, is multimodal, investing in active transportation, a range of things there. But a large number of our citizens are going to continue to drive cars. And the question becomes, what kind? And to the extent they're moving to electric, we need to move with them, actually a little ahead of them, so that when they have them, we're ready.
Right.
That's the way I have been thinking about it. So this is the question now. Is that a correct observation, or am I off? It's okay. You can say, yeah, you're off. That's
No,
okay.
that's-
I want to hear the truth.
That is correct. There's so much to cover here, and I know we've brought a lot forward around electrification. We've done the projections of the charging that we'll need for light duty, right? So increasing 5-fold by 2025, and we're moving towards that. We have some new staff coming on board. We've got the NEVI funds coming forward, and we've got our state plan for increasing the light duty infrastructure. So we'll be moving quickly there. And then today, in terms of medium and heavy duty infrastructure as well, I know we've been talking to you and looking at some pilot opportunities and looking at how to get ahead of that. We've done a white paper on hydrogen, so staying up with the industry about what's happening with hydrogen. We also have a new staff person in the transit department who'll be working on climate. So and you probably know this as well, that we'll be looking at transition plans for all the transit agencies and how they move into low and no emission vehicles and what that's going to look like and what the charging is associated with that. And then a lot of conversations and then the partnerships you've talked about with the utilities, with the private partners, talking with Daimler and others, and where the interest is, what that charging is going to look like. And then working really closely with DEQ, we both play a role in this space and making sure that those vehicles come forward with charging infrastructure. So I think the interesting piece will be that public charging infrastructure. And I love the idea to get out ahead of that and see where we can get some funding and make sure that we've got that public charging infrastructure in place.
And we're connecting with the utilities regularly, and we're connecting with the auto manufacturers in some way. So in other words, if you're reading about the 50 station plaza in Douglas County in the paper, we're behind, right? You need to know well ahead. So you and Amanda in particular have to be our brain trust on this. Know where the pieces are moving, because I see a lot of moving parts to this, and I think they're moving. So we have to, it's an exciting challenge, but there's a lot to keep track of here, I think.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll continue bringing information and updates.
Yeah, I think we need to be hearing regularly, because this is gonna be going on all over the state, particularly the corridors we've identified as a starting point.
Right.
Yeah, that would be good. Next month, maybe talk about all that.
Yep. Okay.
Great. Okay.
Great,
Thank you. Our last item of the day is the biennial flat fee study.
Best for last.
And we have Daniel Porter and Amy Ramsdale here to talk to us about that. So welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Van Brocklin, Commissioners, Vice Chair Brown, Amy Ramsdale, Commerce and Compliance Division Administrator. Today, we are making a recommendation to you as the Commission that you consider forwarding the flat fee study to the legislative body with a recommendation to adjust the sand and gravel rates. The rates are no longer equitable, as this alternative tax allows them to do a flat fee. And so Daniel can discuss why we have chosen to make that recommendation at this point in time. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Amy. All right. For the record, Daniel Porter, ODOT Finance and Budget. So it wouldn't be a commission meeting without at least some kind of finance conversation with you, right? So flat fees, what are flat fees? Flat fees are an optional tax method that certain carriers can pay. And we have listed here: chips, sand and gravel, and log haulers. that they can pay in place of or in lieu of the weight mile tax. And this was originally created, I think, like 1947 for log haulers. And so because they drive a whole bunch of miles on private roads, and it was just a huge hassle for them to be able to keep these like logs. So this was an option. You just pay one flat, basically annual at an annual rate. You pay a certain amount every month, and then you don't have to think about it. And you just keep your records about how many miles you drove in. And you don't have to, this tax burden is a lot simpler. And it's been really, really effective for log haulers. And they've been using it ever since. And it's stayed equitable. The rates have over time on the log side. But on sand and gravel, and really chips is another one that there isn't any chip haulers currently using it. They sort of price themselves out. But sand and gravel is the one that right now is where it's not equitable. And originally the rates would have been set where they were equitable. Equitable meaning like what they would have paid in weight mile would be what you would have paid in the flat fee. But over time, carriers, weights shifted. The number of carriers that are heavier, there's more heavier carriers now on sand and gravel than there used to be in the past. The more miles that are driven on the heavier side. So there's just this inequity. And so this report we produce every 2 years, right? It's part of the statutory requirement that we do. And we have had it before you. So every like November OTC meeting, you've seen this for the last lots of biennium. And really over the last probably 4, we've had the same recommendation, which is really just the first steps, right? So it's us putting the report together, the OTC, saying you're accepting the report and maybe accepting a recommendation to move to the legislative process. We don't set these rates, right? All we're doing is just recommending the rates get adjusted through the legislative process. That could happen through the highway cost allocation process, which happens basically every 2 years about the same time, or they could do it outside of that. And it's up to them, but we just, our part of it is to do the math and show where if there's an inequity or not. In this case, there is. And has been again for several biennia. So that's kind of where we are. So any questions?
So the 990 to 1792, that's the adjustment.
Right.
Okay.
That would be the adjustment for 2021 rates. The rates will go up again. And so it would actually be higher in 2024. Let me pull that up. It is in the report on the first page in that executive summary.
Okay.
And it should be approximately about $19 in 2024 rates.
Okay.
But it's right now the rates are set to just increase at a certain percentage, right? So
Each year.
yeah, right. Well, or each are all tied to House of 2017 right now, right?
Okay.
You have the 2018 increase, then 2020, 2022,
Oh,
2024.
okay.
So there's
They're tied to the gas tax increase.
yes.
Okay.
And so the percentage increase on the flat fee side would be the same percentage increase on the weight mile side. So there's
Gotcha.
no winners or losers in this sense. Yes.
So this is just to set this where it should be, not where it's been,
Right.
Correct.
and make it equitable and fair, and everyone's carrying their part of the burden of the fee system, if you will, tax system.
Correct. That is the intent.
Okay. Questions?
Move approval of advancing the flat fee rate study with recommendation to amend the rates to the legislative assembly.
I have a question.
Okay, can we take a second and then hear your question?
Second.
All right.
Yes.
The moved and seconded discussion. Commissioner Berg.
Like she was so quick on the draw.
It's lunchtime.
I know.
Yes, you are.
It's the last thing. So the underpayment, using the 2021 data, applying 2020 rates. Does that amount to a little under $500,000 is what you're telling us, or it wasn't clear to me from the report?
Excellent question, Commissioner. They paid $250,000. Had they been paying an equitable rate, they would have contributed $500,000 taxes.
Thank you for the clarification.
And there's no recapture effort to go a clawback, anything like that?
Chair Van Brocklen, because they paid the rate that is in
Right.
statute, that's, yeah,
I assume that was. the
yeah,
answer.
we can't.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion?
I'm gonna have an interesting conversation with my husband this evening, who works in sand and gravel.
Politics is local. In your case, very local. Okay, all those in favor of the motion to approve this change, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we were pretty close to right on time today. 11:40, we're at 11:40. I like the way we're rolling ahead. I know. So we are going to break. Well, the meeting is adjourned and the lunch will begin at noon. And Sabrina, where is the lunch? Recording is stopped, so you can tell us this.